Welcome everyone to the latest edition of AI Unscripted. AI and Gen AI work in every industry, and recruitment for life sciences and meditech are no different. Today I welcome Nick Mahoney, Head of Digital Health at Metric Bio, and we're going to talk about life sciences and recruitment. Nick, would you mind, for those individuals who don't know about you or your company, Metric Bio, would you mind telling us a little bit more?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, Kieran. My name's Nick Mahoney. I've been in recruitment for almost 6 years now, and all of that has been pretty much in AI-based recruitment. And Metric Bio are part of Metric Search, and we are a New York-founded high-growth recruitment business, which was founded in 2019, and we have almost 100 consultants working across the areas in which we cover. I focus on head of digital health, on the Metric Bio brand, but interestingly, in our Metric Geo brand, we also look at AI through future mobility as well. But today we'll just be focusing on the AI within life sciences and medtech.
So how does AI impact or interact with life sciences, Nick?
So there are many different ways. And I think some people have a fear when it comes to medicine and AI that it might go a little bit sort of Tony Stark. And Iron Man and things like that. But there really is a lot of touch points for AI in life sciences and in healthcare in general. And I look at them in certain areas. The first one would be the automation within healthcare efficiencies. This is very similar to most business cases in other industries where you would have AI platforms for administration or for the better use and analysis of electronic health records, which is now hugely important in healthcare. So very light touch to actually patient outcomes, but very important to scalable and effective healthcare systems worldwide. Then you look at more patient monitoring and therapeutics. So these might be as light as your wearables, so an Apple Watch or a Whoop, as I've now got. Now I can track my sleep, which is good and bad at the same time. And also therapeutics themselves, so clinical therapeutics that might be app-based or anything like that. A very simple example of that would be the NHS track and trace system, and now it's the NHS app, which was degrees of success on that for people. Then it gets a little bit more juicy, let's say. Medical devices and diagnostics AI is really exciting. That's where you can have a scan or a screening, be it cardiovascular, be it on your brain. So you're utilizing CT scans, MRI, ultrasounds, and you've got an AI that runs on those scans that can support better or more effective diagnosis, or cut out the second reading for radiologists, for example. And then the last bit is probably where people get a bit fearful, but people know it through COVID, is AI being used to create drugs. And that's either to find more proteins or the right molecules. So proteins, potential hundreds of millions of different proteins that can be out there. And Google have put out their first open source protein library, which is fantastic because it means we have lots more different compounds that we can look at. And now we have in 2020, Accenture were the first company to have an AI designed molecule that went into human trials. So there's lots of different ways that AI can touch into life sciences, and there's a lot of exciting ways, but also a lot of regulation that's needed at the same time. But I would premise it with this piece. AI is used for doctors and clinicians to be able to work at the top of their license for the most amount of time.
I really like that, because that's the interesting bit, isn't it? Because if you take a doctor, maybe they look at a scan or number scan a day. So at most in their life, they'll get to look at thousands. Whereas if I train an AI, I could potentially get the AI looking at millions and millions of scans, and therefore it presumably could and should be a lot more accurate when it comes to diagnosis, or it and the actual clinician working together should allow you a multiplier of benefits. And the same thing with proteins, because I think that the winner or the creator of AlphaGo, who did a molecule bending program, one that actually works it out, just won the Nobel Prize in that. There's millions and millions and millions, as you said, of potential combinations. We as humans couldn't possibly cope. And therefore, I do see this in the market. AI is either amazingly brilliant or amazingly bad. I don't think the press allow us to actually have any in between. But to your point, if we use the tool in the right location, put all the risks and governance around it, then we should get the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
How has hiring then changed, Nick, in terms since AI has been in position and really being used in the medical profession since 2019?
So I think just to sort of give an idea of how much things have changed, for people who don't know, in the 1970s, that was when the first body scan of an MRI was done. Sorry, an MRI scan of a body, that way around, in the 1970s. Only in the mid-1980s was the NHS utilising it. And now we're at a point where we're now putting AI models onto those MRIs to diagnose stroke, to diagnose neurodegenerative diseases, to diagnose lots of different ways of looking at it. So what the doctors were thinking was the top of their license in 1980 with the breakthrough of the MRI is now very rudimental in their work. So AI can then get them to push on to work at the top of their license once again, just to sort of close that circle on innovation. And where that means to the hiring is very, very interesting, because if you look at only in the mid-2010s where we're looking at AI in drug discovery, only now we're seeing some really interesting AI advances in radiology or ultrasound. The FDA is huge now post 2020 with AI breakthrough devices in America. A lot of them are in radiology. The big difference is where it was an idea in sort of the mid-2010s and late 2010s and early 2020s. A lot of it was around research. So AI was around what does make a good AI engineer? It was what do their papers look like? What do their publications look like? How can they create really impressive models? Now, what people are really looking for is how production ready are those models? How well can they integrate into not only the real world, but then into, take medical devices, the extremely difficult healthcare IT systems, because they are difficult. A lot of them are on-prem and not a lot of them are on cloud. So it's very, very interesting that you can create an amazingly effective model, but actually the healthcare system is no way near ready to have it. So it's that blend of exceptional talent and research, but also the ability to solve the problem of implementation into IT systems, but also the navigating the regulatory pathway as well, which we've seen hugely important, and the biggest change in profiles that needed.
Yeah, I suppose that comes down to the, what's classically known as the black box element. I'm signing off on something and my insurance says I'm ultimately responsible. And when I can see it and touch it with my own eyes, maybe it feels slightly different. So in terms of recruitment, what sort of skills and experiences should candidates get to best position themselves in this ever-infused AI market?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because it is slightly dependent on where you're going into. So what I'll be saying around a data scientist going into a digital health company that might be looking at creating a wellness platform that sells to mid-market employers will be different to a drug discovery company because the nature of it. But when you're doing a master's or a PhD or your first sort of year or two following a bachelor's, it's super important that you're working as close to the product as possible, or as close to the medical area or the science as possible. Doing fantastic publications now, unfortunately, that are a bit in the sort of prescribed area, maybe sandboxy, as someone who used to play Age of Empires back in the day, is a good way to describe it. unfortunately won't cut you against the other people who are in the market. So really look at that. And what I mean is, have you implemented your model on an MRI data set? Have you been involved in your NLP models or your Gen AI models going into a healthcare system, or going and fitting into a larger ecosystem of apps or integrated APIs that is utilized for a wellness product and by an insurance? Have you actually seen it out there and produced results? Because that is fundamentally the biggest difference. And that's something that, when you're trying to stand out, is hugely beneficial to speak to, for example, when speaking to hiring managers.
Yeah, it must be very satisfying for the data scientist or the professional as well, to actually see the fruits of their labor actually working and making an impact. So that's probably a win-win for recruiters and for the recruitee. So final question, how do you set up your team, and how do you set them up for success in AI going into 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, I think the really important things to note is the regulatory changes that are coming through. Obviously, the EU AI Act and that being worked through. Look at your team internally and think, is my team set up to success against the technical roadmap, which I need to, based on what's coming forward. We've seen California release in the US their first AI regulations, and that will most likely be a framework which other states take over, and probably then is the catalyst for something more in the USA. So fundamentally, as people are looking to make AI more regulated and more equitable, is your team's skill set up for success to navigate that forward? Or do I need to understand more how that will affect my team and the roadmap? So that's number one going into 2025. Number two is, what are the skills gap that I need to look at in my team? Very, very simple to do. And I think it's something that people do miss when looking at their teams and looking at both internal development areas and external development areas. I think your recruitment can be a hard job at some time, especially when you're a hiring manager. And if you can develop your teams internally, then do that first. It's easier. It's 10 times easier most of the time. But look at the areas people who want to go into it, who maybe want to go more product based or more research based or something like that. Like, engage with those people, but really try and think, is my team set up to implement and scale? And if it's not, then look at what sort of profiles and talent that you would need to bring in to enable yourself to do that. Perfect.
Nick, if folks are interested in finding a job and interested in finding out a little bit more about you and the company, where do they reach out to? Where do they go?
Sure. So we have metric search. If you search for metricsearch.com, then we can look at metric bio, metric geo, and then our executive search functionality as well. We've just had a multi-million pound investment by the British Growth Fund, or BGF, who is one of the most active investors in Europe. So we've got a very, very strong executive search functionality, and it's very client friendly as well. So if you're looking at that exec level, we can absolutely facilitate that now. We've had some very exciting conversations around that. And then also, if you're coming through the ranks, let's say, and starting your career, reach out to me directly. I'm always very, very happy to talk about AI and talk about AI hiring. And perhaps if you're interested in future mobility, my colleague Zeke Arlott, his LinkedIn will be attached to there somewhere, I'd imagine. He'd be more than happy to explain the industry and that as well. So if you want to have flying cars and autonomous driving, go and speak to Zeke. If you want to help patient outcomes and find the best drugs for the right people, come and speak to me.
Fantastic. We'll add all those links on to the body of the message. Nick, thank you so much indeed. And thank you everyone for listening in today.
Pleasure. Thanks, Kieran.